Welcome to part 3 of the Trabant engine rebuild series. Today we're going to be assembling the engine, complete with so many brand new parts, it'll basically be a brand new engine. And we begin engine reassembly with the two halves of the crankcase. And look at them, they're so clean they almost look like new parts. Because they are. This is the new crankcase I ordered from Hungary. This is the old crankcase, and the reason I couldn't use it is because of the worn rotary valve guides. These surfaces are so grooved up I was afraid they would just eat straight through the new rotary valves, and I couldn't find any machinists that had tools to machine down into this groove, so new crankcase it was. And here's my freshly rebuilt crankshaft assembly, also from Hungary. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank my parts sourcer, Ed, from Budapest. He's the one that got the majority of the parts you will see today. He communicated with the Hungarian Trabant parts source that he knows, since they don't speak English, and he got me all the stuff I needed, like this crankcase, this crankshaft assembly, a bunch of other parts you'll see today. He was responsible for nearly all of it. Not only that, he shipped it to the United States to my door. But he didn't exactly just ship it straight from Hungary to the United States. No, that would be too expensive. He went on vacation to America and brought these Trabant parts on the plane with him. And from wherever he went on vacation, he then sent the parts to my door via UPS or something. And that is a level of dedication that you can't just ask for. So, thanks, Ed. I now have a bunch of Trabant parts, thanks to you. And the first thing I need to do with the new crankshaft is slightly modify it. I need to take this sealing ring seen here off the old crankshaft and put it on the new one. Right, I lost a week, and let's see if I can explain why as briefly as possible. There are two different types of crankshaft seals on a Trabant. There's the old style of seal, which is just this shiny metal ring and a radial rubber sealing ring. It's very basic. The new style of crankshaft sealing ring sort of looks like piston rings. You have this inner metal ring with two piston ring looking things on the inside, and then the outer ring that the piston rings shove into, and it rotates much more freely than the rubber one. The piston ring style one is considered an upgrade, I believe. Newly rebuilt crankshafts such as this one generally come with the piston ring style of crankshaft seal. However, when this newly rebuilt crankshaft was ordered, they were completely out of stock on crankshaft seals entirely. But I told Ed, my parts getter guy, that this was no issue because I could pull the metal sealing ring off the old crankshaft and just use a rubber seal on the new crankshaft, even though that's not typically what people do. However, as I found out when I tried to pull the metal sealing ring off the old crankshaft, is that the metal sealing ring is not a standalone part. It's the same bit as the inner bearing race. Now, I could just use the old bearing off the old crankshaft and just take the bearing and seal as one whole unit and put it on the new one, but this inner bearing race is completely chewed up and I just need the seal bit anyway. So I contacted some machine shops to see if they would chuck this on a lathe and cut off the inner bearing race bit that I don't need so I could just have the sealing ring, because I didn't have this crankshaft seal. And what they told me was, no, this is hardened steel, you can't put it on a lathe and cut it. But thankfully, I happen to know another Trabant owner in Virginia who has taken apart his engine as well. So I sent him a message saying, hey, do you happen to have one of these piston ring style crankshaft seals for the pulley side of the engine? And he said yes. Thankfully, he said yes. So I sent him some money and he expeditedly shipped this part to me that I'm holding in my hand today and saved this whole build from another month of waiting. I had to wait a week, but that is a shorter amount of time than a month, as you may or may not know. Now I just need to figure out how to smash these piston ring looking things down to get it into the housing. Use the smooth part of this pick as to not damage the ring. There we go. That's one of them in. That was actually not that hard. And now that it's in place, you can see how freely it spins and just whack onto the crankshaft. This sealing ring is slightly thicker than the rubber sealing ring, so the pulley is a slightly different height. This is a new pulley that I ordered. Rotary rotary valves. I have 2 new ones. Here they are. I also have 4 new springs to hold them in place. And the locating pins on the new crankshaft are, as expected, perfectly fine, unlike the old crankshaft. Now these are directional. You can see a mild difference between the sides here. And thankfully I have the old crankshaft to tell me which direction is which, because otherwise I would have absolutely no idea, because I don't know why they're directional. I have no idea what difference these 2 shapes make, but apparently they go on in one direction. So I'm just going to copy the old crankshaft. Now I'm just lining it up on the pins here just to see how it goes in place, but obviously first I need to put these little springs in their little holes. The old springs in the old crankshaft were completely shot, and that was probably causing a very large amount of my engine issues. Pin 1, pin 2, just like that. And other new rotary valve, again in the same direction. With the rotary valves in place and the pulley in place, it's now time to insert the crankshaft into the crankcase. Just smear a little assembly lube on the rotary valve wiping surfaces. Now apply a skim coat of RTV to this sealing surface here. And now, let's try to get everything pre-lined up. Somehow, this is going to be pretty difficult with the rotary valve situation. Put the con rods through first. The rotary valves, lift it up. This central bearing has a pin that aligns with the middle, and it is just woefully unaligned. Is that it? Yeah, I got it. Now to align the pins on the bearings in the middle. I guess the next thing is the top half of the case, or actually the bottom half. And I need to apply a very, very thin layer of RTV to seal the 2 crankcase halves together. The manual actually calls for cellulose lacquer, and I don't have any of that, so I'm going to use just extremely thin RTV. I've been informed that that is okay. As long as I use the high-tip stuff, I can seal these 2 crankcase halves together with RTV. Now, I'll be honest, I don't know how much is too much RTV to apply to this, so I'm just kind of smearing it around in a real thin layer and hoping for the best. Now comes the slightly difficult task of pushing these rotary valves out of the way while I'm holding half the engine with one hand. That's how light this stupid thing is. And there we go. I torqued the engine down to 25 pound-feet, which is just about what it produces itself. I can't believe how weak that feels. Let's flip it over and see how well it rotates. There's some resistance, as should be expected. But everything turns nicely. Now for this sealing ring with a new gasket on the back side and new rubber seal in the middle. Like I said earlier, the newer style would use the piston ring type seal for the flywheel, but I didn't want to buy a new flywheel or a new one of these rings, so a rubber seal will do nicely. It just slides in like so. Yes, this is the same ring that I chipped a chunk out of down here, and no, it doesn't matter. Flywheel time! Flywheel nut time. Now for this flywheel nut, I couldn't seem to find a torque spec on it, so I'm going to go with the classic German measurement of Gutentite. Now to bend the bendy washer in place. Speaking of, I forgot to bend the bendy washer on the pulley side. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to answer a few questions that you may be having. Question A. Why didn't I rebuild my old crankshaft myself instead of just buying a new one like a lazy person? Well, I didn't want to. And the locating pins for the rotary valves on my old crankshaft were completely boogered up and, to my knowledge, can't be replaced. There's also the matter that it presses apart and together, and there's some alignment to do, and I didn't want to mess with any of that. Question B. Why didn't I buy a fully rebuilt Trabant engine for just about the same price and way less effort than rebuilding this engine with new parts? Well, where would the fun be in that? Half the reason I wanted to rebuild this engine was so I could have a peek inside, see how everything ticks, and maybe learn something new, and hopefully pass some of that knowledge on to you, because especially if you're in the United States, how many of you have even seen a Trabant up close, let alone the inside and inner workings of the engine and the gearbox? Now it's time to install the pistons into place. There is a backside to these pistons. I think I have it right. Let's do this one first, make sure everything's lined up-ish. Put it over top like so. I just have to kind of look where it's going, make sure it goes in the right place. The needle bearings have to be lined up too, obviously. My little wrist pin pusher puller thing isn't the most elegant piece of engineering, but it sure does work. Not very well, but it does work. And there we go, wie as done. Now to use the ever trusty gudgeon pin insertion tool. I ought to sell these. Right, because people are in the market for garbage tools. Now I just need the clip to hold the gudgeon pin in place. Keep it from sliding either way, and we're done. Pistons inserted. Now it's everybody's favorite time, jug time. I don't really like this process because the pistons go in the cylinders from underneath, which means I have to put this piston ring clamp around it and then put the cylinder over top, thus trapping the piston ring clamp, and that is very annoying. But there are some pins back here to line up the piston rings onto, and then it's just a matter of going squeezy with the clamp. Make sure all the rings are lined up. It sounded like it broke. Sounded a lot like it broke. Oh no! Oh no! Oh God. I've just made error of errors. This little piece, this little tiny metal chunk I'm holding in my hand is a broken off piece of one of the piston rings. What happened was there's a little alignment pin on the piston rings to align it, and one of the rings had gone over that. I clamped down the clamp over it, broke it in half. I ordered piston rings. It's now several weeks later, and here they are. And because I ain't no dummy, on occasion, I ordered 3 of them. I only needed 1, but I ordered 3 of them in case I happen to break any more. So I'm prepared. But anyway, as you can see, off camera, I installed this cylinder, and I didn't use a piston ring clamp for that. I'll show you that in a second. First, let's get this new piston ring in place. And by the way, these are 73 millimeter cylinder bores. I had to measure it. Technically, it's stamped on here. It's 73.21, but it's a Trabant. The tolerances aren't great. Sliding these piston rings into place is actually somewhat difficult. And it's in place. That was not terrible. Now for sliding the jug over top. I tried to use this piston ring clamp, but someone on the internet told me that this piston ring clamp is completely unnecessary and I don't need to use it. And it turns out they're correct, as I found out with this jug here, because there's a nice little chamfer on the bottom of the jug here, and I can just lube that up real good and basically just slide it over, guide the piston rings into place, and it works just fine. So let's get to lubing. When I tried this the first time, it was just a little bit finicky, but it wasn't actually that bad at all. That's 1 ring down. That's 2. Have to give it a little more of a squeeze. Use an instrument of squeezage. There we go. And it just slides down into place. Let's give the flywheel a little rotation here. And both the jugs are in place. Not bolted down just yet. I'll get to that in a second. Another thing I ordered with the piston rings, because I forgot to order it the first time, is this little bendy lock washer thing that goes here behind the flywheel nut. This one was boogered up. I reused it. I'm going to take it off now and put on this new one that I ordered, just for a little bit of extra security. This is like a couple dollars, so why not? To install the ignition housing and the cover, freshly painted. I'll get to the actual ignition in there after a little bit. Temporarily put the exhaust manifold in place for alignment purposes of the cylinders. You may have noticed I'm using copper nuts for this, and that's because I saw it available and I thought, why not? I'm not really sure the purpose of them. Maybe some anti-seize. I don't know. They looked cool, so I bought them. They were very cheap. This shield goes between the cylinders. Like so. This is very annoying, and unfortunately the tight reach won't even fit in here. Putting the exhaust manifold on here to align the cylinders was great and all, but now the bolts on the bottom are completely inaccessible, so I have to take it off again. These nuts get tightened down to 16 pound-feet of torque, roughly, something like that, but I can't fit a torque wrench in there, so I'm just going to go by feel. The heads are next. I have these fancy premium head gaskets instead of these cheapy stamped aluminum ones that they send with the kits. Yes, I know the heads look dirtier than the jugs that they're sitting on. Deal with it. The head nuts get torqued to something like 32 pound-feet, which is about 5 pound-feet more than the engine puts out itself. I keep running into the problem of asking myself the question, what do I work on next? Because I could really do any number of things. And since the cylinders and pistons and heads and everything are bolted in place and ready to go, I think the next thing I'm going to work on is the carburetor and then the exhaust manifold, and then I might touch the air shrouding and go from there. I bought this carburetor about 3 years ago. At the time it was brand new from the factory and pre-tuned and everything, and I barely used it since. Even so, I took a peek inside and it is completely spotless, so I shouldn't have any problems with the carburetor. And yes, I did remember to bolt on the little return spring clip when assembling the two engine cases. I'm not sure how I remembered to do that, but I did. I thought these exhaust nuts were copper, but I ground the flange off of one and they appear to just be copper coated, which I have to say is extremely disappointing. But I'm going to use them anyway because they still look cool. Little bits of the fan shroud that I totally should have put on first before the fan, but I got it. As you can see, I got a new 6-volt generator. Did I need to? No, but shiny new parts are cool and the old one looked like it had been slightly on fire at some point. So I got a new generator. Now for the remainder of the air shroud. Air shroud in place. Now time for the brand new world's tiniest clutch and the old pressure plate. I didn't do anything to this flywheel. I didn't think it needed it. You know your engine doesn't put out much power when the entire clutch assembly pressure plate thing is held on by M6 bolts. Time to use this awful alignment tool. Unlike most alignment tools, this doesn't stick into a pilot bearing because there isn't one. It just sort of fits into a divot on the end of the crankshaft. That's all I have to align it by. It seems to work fine, so I suppose I shouldn't complain. Click. Perfect. This is, I believe, weak enough that I can press it in with my thumbs. Nope, I'm wrong. I'm weaker than a Trabant clutch. At this point in time, I'd like to go over the engine and point out all the things that are still original. Original being what came on the car when I took delivery of it, because I have no idea what was changed before that. The original parts are the flywheel, the clutch pressure plate, the air shroud, the fan, the ignition housing, the exhaust manifold, some fasteners, oh, the heads, and everything else is new. That's the crankshaft, the crankcase, the pistons, the cylinders, all the big engine-y bits are new. So this is basically a new engine. Next is the ignition system. This is the original ignition system in the Trabant. It's just a twin-point distributorless ignition. Has a little cam in the middle that spins and actuates the points. And it's very simple and it works very fine. Except for me, it has never worked fine. The timing seems to jump all over the place. I've never been able to adjust it properly, and I'm just frankly sick of messing with it. So what I got was this, an electronic ignition for the Trabant. I think this is called the Easy 2 electronic ignition kit, and this one is made specifically for 6-volt cars. So I don't have to do anything modificating to the electrical system to make this work. The only difference between this and that as far as running power is that this has an extra wire to supply 6 volts to the system. I'll set it up later, but for now I'm just going to screw it in place. I'm not even sure I have the right way facing out. Doesn't matter at this point. Because this is an electronic ignition, instead of having a cam that spins around actuating points, it has this, which just fits right under the crankshaft like so. And there's this little ring here with 2 magnets that wipe past the Hall effect sensor on the board to make the sparky bits go. Again, I'm not timing this or anything right now. I'm just sort of shoving it in place. Throw in a couple of new spark plugs for good measure. Hopefully, after the engine is rebuilt, I'll have to change these less often than I did before, because that gets annoying very quickly. I think it's gearbox time now. This is heavy, this is heavy, this is heavy, this is heavy. It's upside down now. This is the gearbox I rebuilt in the last episode, and before I mate it to the engine, I need to dress it up a bit. And no, I don't mean for a fancy dinner party. I need to add engine mounts and other little bracketry bits to it before I can put it on the engine. I mean, I really don't need to, but it'd be easier while it's not connected to another giant heavy chunk of metal. And now we're ready for the marriage ceremony. Somehow, this is about the lightest gearbox imaginable, but it's still a little bit of a faff. I think that's it. I think that's it. Okay. I guess I just rotate the engine until it slots into the alignment pins. Like that. Guess who's an idiot and forgot to bring the bolts over here? This guy. Got it. And now to throw the starter back into place. The starter is also a new piece from a couple of years ago. And that's it. It's all back together. The only thing left is to install this big old chunk of motivation into the Trabant's engine bay and get everything all hooked up and running right. But I'll do that in the next episode. That's going to do it for part 3. So until part 4 comes out, thanks for watching.